the greatest tragedy in the history of the world. Many times you hear of great tragedies around the world like boat sinking, city riots, or tornadoes. You may think of those as great tragedies, but in my mind, the greatest tragedy ever to happen in the history of mankind was the mass killings and persecution of the Jews and Gypsies, otherwise known as the Holocaust or Final Solution. The Holocaust was a plan to eliminate the Jews and Gypsies, Russians, homosexuals, mentally or physically disabled people, and many others, to make the complete Aryan race, an Aryan person being someone with blue eyes and blonde hair, a plan carried out by Adolf Hitler. About 14 million Jews and Gypsies and other persecuted groups were killed in the course of the Holocaust, 1939 to 1945. Hitler's hatred for the Jews started when he was a kid. His mother was in the hospital with cancer, and her Jewish doctor said that he had tried everything to save her. But in little Hitler's mind, he thought the doctor intended for Adolf's mother to die. Another reason for hating Jews was when Hitler wanted to go to art school, the people accepting students didn't let Hitler in their school. Adolf thought that Jews were the ones that kept him out of art school. Hitler also thought that mentally and physically disabled people held back the creation of smart Aryan people, so he planned to have them incinerated. Hitler was a messenger for Germany in the Great War. Hitler was temporarily blinded by a poison gas attack and put out of service. While he was in the infirmary, Germany surrendered and the war was over. Hitler thought that Germany had betrayed him and that Germany should have kept fighting. In the 1930s, Germany was in a Great Depression. Like many societies, Germany needed someone to turn to, and that someone was Adolf Hitler. Hitler's beliefs, hatred for the Jews, led the rest of the German citizens believing the way Hitler believed. Hitler got people on his side by making promises of restoring Germany after World War I, creating a better military, festivals supporting the Nazi way, biased speeches of eliminating Jews and Gypsies. He promised every German that was able to drive, and also if they were good Nazis, a Volkswagen Beetle. Hitler got the German kids on his side by creating the organization Hitler Youth. In the Hitler Youth, boys were taught to fight, go camping, compete in sports and physical fitness programs, and the girls were taught to dance and be good mothers. The girls were told to find the best man and have as many Aryan babies as possible. Probably the most recognizable event leading to the Holocaust was Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass. On November 9th and 10th, Kristallnacht was the night in which the Nazis invaded Jewish shops, looting them and telling customers not to go there. Not every German thought that the same as Hitler did. Even people members of the Nazi Party did not agree with his beliefs. One example of this is the attempted assassination on June 21, 1941. Klaus von Stauffenberg planted a bomb in a briefcase, and while Hitler and his crew were at his Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia, the bomb did not work. As a result of the failed attempt, Hitler had the SS arrest and kill numerous high-ranking army officers and their relatives and anyone remotely suspected of opposing the Nazi regime. As if the looting of Jewish businesses wasn't enough, the Nuremberg laws were created to limit the Jews. These laws prevented non-Aryans from attending or participating in plays, sports, and other everyday activities. In the public schools, children were taught to hate non-Aryans, and because of this, when non-Aryan children were beaten up or persecuted, authorities did not care. In these laws, there was no real clear legal way of defining who was non-Aryan or Aryan, and because of this, some non-Aryans escaped some areas of persecution. Aryans were forbidden to display the Reich and show the national flag or wear national colors, but they could wear the Jewish colors. If you betrayed these laws, you could be imprisoned, forced to perform hard labor, and pay a fee. People defined as Jews could then be barred from employment as lawyers, doctors, or journalists. Jews were prohibited from using state hospitals and could not be educated by the state past the age of 14. Public parks, libraries, and beaches were also closed off to Jews. War memorials were to have Jewish names expunged. Even the lottery could not award winnings to Jews. In the early stages of the Holocaust, Nazis put up signs on Jewish shops telling people not to go there. If anyone disobeyed this order, they were beaten up, shot, or taken away to a concentration camp. Hitler created camps for extermination, execution, labor, and transit. The most famous death/concentration camp is Auschwitz. Hitler's intent for concentration camps was for experiments and also death. The purpose for a death camp was simple: kill as many Jews and Gypsies as they could. The intent for a transit camp was to hold people until death at a concentration camp had an opening. The conditions for a transit camp were just as bad as a death camp. Germans were born hating Jews, raised hating Jews, and the law that kept them safe from persecution had been stripped away by Adolf Hitler. Later, Nazis rounded up groups of Jews and forced them to fix damages from World War I. In 1941, Hitler required that every Jew was to wear a special armband with the Star of David printed on it to identify Jews. Later, Jews and Gypsies were taken to ghettos. Many people who feared being caught by the Germans built hideaways so the Nazis couldn't find them. Ghettos were old towns that had walls and fence around them. The biggest ghetto was in Poland's old capital, Warsaw. 400,000 Jews were trapped within the walls of Warsaw at a time. With the constant stream of new refugees, the ghetto became more and more crowded. In the ghetto, people had ragged clothes and were often barefoot. The living conditions were terrible. People had nothing to do but just lie there and hope to live and wish for someone to save them. 40 to 50 people died each day to starvation. If someone stuck up to the Nazis or if a Jew did something a Nazi did not approve of, they were beaten up, shot, or taken away to a concentration camp. Hitler didn't want troublemakers in his ghettos, and Hitler just despised Jews, so he had his army send them away or kill them. Hitler's final solution had begun. When people arrived at a camp, they had everything with them taken away, from shoes, gold teeth, wedding rings, glasses, valuables, and such, and were given striped clothes. They were also given a tattoo with a serial number. Even toddlers got a tattoo. Hitler targeted all Jewish people, not just adults. Jewish children watched their families be killed. Jews were forced to work by digging trenches and mass graves. Then they were stood up around the mass grave and shot by the Nazis. Children were plucked from their families and their childhoods were taken. Some people were so light the noose could not hang them. On one occasion, Jewish children were given enough morphine to kill them, and then they were hung on a wall. As one Nazi officer said, like pictures on a wall. Dr. Joseph Mengele was considered the doctor at Auschwitz, a death camp. Mengele saw Auschwitz as a chance to experiment on heredity. He had an interest in abnormalities. He did experiments by putting chemicals in patients' eyes to make them blue like an Aryan. He performed unneeded amputations to see what the results would be. Most of his patients died of the experiments from infection. When he did his experiments, he did not anesthetize his patients. When he chose people to experiment on, he gave them candies and sweets and talked nice to them. He loved to experiment on twins. He would stitch them together and take them apart or amputate the twins and switch limbs. 1.1 million Jewish children were killed from 1939 to 1945, and an estimated 14 million total persecuted people died in World War II. 1,100,000 estimated people were killed at Auschwitz. Auschwitz was liberated January 27, 1945 by the Red Army, also known as the Soviet Union. Many camps did not keep records of how many prisoners they had or were killed in their camp. When a camp was discovered, residents of surrounding areas were forced to see and clean up the camps. There were about 1,500 camps. Some could be as big as a school ground or as big as a college campus. In 1945, Americans liberated the Camp Buchenwald, one of Hitler's thousands of camps. The people slept in huts. Sleeping space was very limited. The Nazis fed a watery soup with potatoes with stale bread. Many of the people were basically skin and bones. One kind of camp was a labor camp. The Nazis had the Jews dig trenches, build additions to the camps, and do other mindless work. The intent for the work was to work the people to death. The Nazis made the Jews work because the bullet cost more than labor. Close to the end of the war in Europe, Hitler and his wife, Eva Braun, died in a bunker in Berlin, April 18, 1945. Hitler was 56 and he committed suicide. First, Adolf and Eva took pills, and when that didn't work, Adolf shot himself and Eva. I believe that Hitler committed suicide because he did not want to be tortured. Perhaps if Hitler had not committed suicide, the Soviet Union would have either killed Hitler and Eva or taken them as prisoners and tortured them. Still thinks sinking boats, car bombs, and plane crashes are great tragedies? This is my opinion, but from what I told you, I hope that you see that concentration camps, millions of deaths, and the Nazi reign was and still is and forever will be, in my mind, the greatest tragedy in the history of the world. My reaction: how could anyone possibly do this to so many people and be so cold-hearted? how could you make yourself kill so many people so systematically? It blows my mind why anyone would do this.